I'm Senior Biotech Analyst John Vandermosten with the CEO of ACHV Life Sciences, John Bencich. Today we're going to talk about the company's lead asset, cytisinicline. John, let's just start out with kind of the pathway that you've been on over the last, you mentioned 6 years. We started out with a phase 2 study and we've done 2 phase 3 studies. Walk us through there kind of what we've seen in the clinical trials that we've done so far.
Yeah, so we've made great progress. This is a drug that's been on the market in Eastern Europe for over 20 years, but it was unclear really how the profile would present itself here in the US when we combined full US behavioral support. So we started off with a trial we called ORCA-1, and this was a dose-finding trial to really understand what was the appropriate dose and administration to take forward into phase 3 development. So we looked at 4 different active arms against matched placebo. All 4 looked great from an efficacy perspective, but what we found is that a flat dosing at a doubling of the doses of what's been on the market in Eastern Europe was the best performing arm of the bunch. We saw 50% biochemically confirmed quit rates at the end of 25 days of treatment compared to only 10% on placebo. And more importantly, we saw that efficacy maintained over a subsequent 4-week period, which is the FDA approvable endpoint. And that was statistically significant with only 50 patients per arm in that study. So we took that forward into phase 3. And in addition to selecting that higher 3 milligram dose on the flat dosing, we also extended the dosing from 25 days out to 6 and 12 weeks. And that allowed us to measure the FDA approvable endpoint while patients are still on medication. So the FDA looks for 4 consecutive weeks of not a single cigarette. And with 25 days of treatment, some, if not all of that, would have to be post-treatment. And we know that quit rates are never higher than when someone's on the drug. Certainly. And then there is a natural relapse rate once it's removed. So we wanted to put our best foot forward in terms of the trial design, but we also wanted to maintain a shorter course of therapy at 6 weeks. So we designed 2 phase 3 trials, ORCA-2 and ORCA-3, both in roughly 800 subjects each. And we looked at 3 arms in each of those trials, a placebo arm, a 6-week treatment arm, and a 12-week treatment arm. And we couldn't have been happier with both results. We validated both the 6 and 12-week courses. We saw odds ratios in the range of roughly 4 to 6. And we think that compares very favorably to what's been available to date, which is really in the 2 to 3 range. So 2 to 3 times more likely to result in a patient quitting compared to placebo. So really unprecedented levels of efficacy. And I think if something were to have gone wrong in the phase 3 trial, it would have been on the safety side, doing a higher dose for a longer period of time. But yeah, we saw really strong tolerability overall. It's been predominantly single-digit rates of adverse events, no serious treatment-related AEs, so it continues to be very well tolerated, and we think that's a huge differentiator for us.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to bring up actually was in the side effect profile, and I think there were actually certain side effects were actually better in the active arm than they were in the placebo arm, which is great, because I think that's what we want to see when you're quitting smoking, is you want to feel better, right? Can you share some of the thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, this has been kind of our key differentiator since day one. There's been a huge challenge with existing therapies on the market in terms of tolerability.
Sure.
Chantix, for example, has a 28% rate of nausea, double-digit rates of insomnia, headache, abnormal dreams, and nightmares. So, all sorts of things that you don't necessarily want as you're going through a quit attempt, in addition to a historic boxed warning for suicidal ideations. So there's been challenges with people wanting to utilize that product, yet it still was $1 billion product on market. So, what we've seen, again, single-digit rates for the most part, and what we're seeing mostly is withdrawal symptoms. So again, some insomnia, some headache, some nausea, but we have seen in some cases, more nausea and headache in the placebo arm. Yet we're getting 4 to 6 times more patients quitting. So, there is some palliative effect of the drug that seems to come through there. But, in this setting in particular, this is more elective. We think tolerability should really resonate with smokers looking to quit, and also help with compliance as they go through therapy, because we do see a high degree of non-compliance with the existing medications.
Certainly. Yeah, if you're feeling sick and not feeling good, you're probably going to quit the drug. Yeah. So it seems like cytisinicline is in a better better state there. Another thing you're working on is vaping. So that's something that wasn't really a big thing back when cytisinicline, when varenicline or Chantix was getting approved decade or so ago, more than a decade ago. Tell us about what you're working on there and why that's an important layer on indication to have for cytisinicline.
Vaping is a huge problem. This is something that's grown up over the last 10 to 15 years from almost no users to now 11 million adult users in the US from the last report, and that's a 20% year-over-year growth. There's been huge amounts of issues with the youth picking up products like Juul. These are kids that never would have picked up a cigarette and are now getting hooked on these e-cigarette products. And currently there are no medications indicated to help people quit e-cigarettes. All the smoking cessation products on the market today are all generic. So there's no incentive for anyone to really look at whether or not they work in this setting. So we've always been very interested to see if cytisinicline could help in this setting. We were fortunate enough to partner with NIDA and the NIH to run a proof of concept phase 2 study here in the US. We had Dr. Nancy Rigotti from Harvard Mass General as the primary investigator on that study. It was 160 subjects. Again, just a proof of concept to see if we had any activity there. Sure enough, we validated 12 weeks of therapy. We saw an odds ratio of just over 2.6 and helping folks quit in that setting. I think the big difference is the age demographic was considerably
probably a lot younger.
It was like mid-30s versus mid-50s is what we typically see from our smoking cessation trials.
Well, and I think another thing, if I remember correctly, I guess the nicotine concentration is quite a bit higher in vaping than it is in combustible cigarettes, isn't that right?
It can be, and I think we've seen reports. You look at a Juul pod, it's roughly the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes, and we've seen reports of people using 2 to 3 of those.
I didn't realize it was that much.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, interesting. All right. Well, one of the great things about ACHV is that you were in the very last stages of your drug development process. You've completed your second phase 3 trial, and you're preparing the package for your new drug application. Tell us about what milestones we might see between now and when you might submit that.
So we've been focused historically really on the clinical development side of things. We do still have 3 trials that are running in the backdrop. We've got a TQ interval trial, a renal impairment study, and one final PK trial. Those will all wrap up by the end of this year. Nothing that would really impact the product profile that we've seen to date. So we scheduled a pre-NDA meeting with the FDA in the 4th quarter of this year. So that's really our final opportunity to have a dialogue with the FDA before we submit, make sure that we're checking all the boxes that they're expecting. And we're anticipating an NDA submission first half of next year to really get the clock started. And that would put approval date first half of 2025.
Okay, well, very good. The last thing I wanted to touch on is I guess the environment for owning this asset. Pfizer owned the last big asset here, Chantix, and as I think we talked about earlier, it was over $1 billion product. And if we look at some of the big pharmas, their revenues are kind of rolling down after COVID. A lot of patents are rolling off, and an attractive product that we kind of get a sense of what revenues it might generate is a pretty attractive thing out there. What do you see on the horizon in terms of M&A for the cytisinicline asset?
Yeah, I mean, we've always believed that this asset was going to be best served in the hands of pharma, or big biotech, a group that already has a primary care sales force in place that they can drop this into. So we continue to believe that. We've got a process running in the backdrop in terms of reaching out to potential partners or acquirers, depending on what the interest level looks like. But we think there's a wide universe of folks that would be interested in this asset. We do see it as $1 billion plus overall opportunity. I mean, Chantix never lived up to its full potential because of the tolerability profile. So we see ability to expand this market, especially with the Affordable Care Act overlay that basically guarantees
mandatory
coverage and reimbursement.
And vaping, don't forget about that.
And vaping as
if you get the approval for
new
that,
growth category. So we think huge opportunity, and we think there's a lot of groups that should be interested in this, and that's something that will play out in the backdrop as we continue to move this forward through the regulatory process.
Okay, great. Well, John, thank you so much. We've had the CEO of ACHV Life Sciences, John Bencich, with us in the studio. Thank you for joining us.